think drop a link in the chat, people will follow.
Yeah, yeah. So if I get that.
And then what I'll do is I'll put up a new Instagram story and change the link.
Yeah.
Shall I announce to the chat that there's going to be a new link?
If you could, I would appreciate it.
Sure.
That way I can do this thing. Thank you. You're a gem. You can blame my crappy tech. Oh, hang on.
He's setting up with a new
Is it the
stream
same?
with a new
Oh.
link. It doesn't look like it is.
It doesn't, but it sounds like it is. It's playing now, but this is very odd. God, it's playing in my ears. This is...
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything coming through on the stream itself.
Weird. Okay.
Okay, well, I have a wonderful pun that I think will cause people to forgive us, so shall I tell people
Go for it.
We'll have a new link for them shortly?
Yep.
Well, being obstinate.
There we go. All right, so this, I think, is going to work, presumably. Okay. All right. Transition.
Seriously, though, where's the live chat? It ran away.
I have people talking to me here.
Okay, no, I just can't find it. Oh, no, here it is. Okay.
All right, so...
There we go. There we go. It's functioning.
Yay.
Thank goodness. All right. Praise be to all the powers of technology that we did not have to start an entirely new stream.
Yes.
Because I was worried for a second.
Yes, that was incredibly obnoxious.
Yes, and thank you all for bearing with us, and thank you all for giving me an excuse to make that pun about OBS. I've been waiting to make that for months. Tell me it isn't true, though.
I mean, it's definitely true. Good lord.
Anyways, all right, so now that we've dealt with all of the technical difficulties, and I am most of a cup of tea in, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being patient with us, and we're going to continue with story time. So, Liz has me reading Stave 4, which I shall be reading on ye old iPad. Come on. Here we are. All right, and then depending upon if I am prevailed upon by you good audience members or not, I might go off on a tangent and I might read from an absolutely beautiful book of Jewish fairy tales I have. I might sing a carol. I might even take a request.
Okay, here we are.
I vanished.
You
I
did.
No longer on the screen.
You did vanish. I apologize. It's because the display died, and I'm moving you back. You'll be back in just a moment. But
right.
oh, everybody's very sweet in the chat. Okay.
I'm back. I exist. I don't know with the lag what it will actually sound like to the good viewers, but...
You know, we do what we can do.
We do our best. All right. Now I see both of us.
Yay!
Yay! Excellent. Okay. So, without any further technology-related emergencies, why don't we begin?
Let's shall.
Stave 4, The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of things which have not happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer it received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition, and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed on him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future!" he exclaimed. "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and to do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for rather the city seemed to spring up about them, and encompass them of its own act. But there they were in the heart of it, on 'change amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down, and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced and listened to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first, with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey cock.
Good
There's
Lord.
some description, Dickens.
Yeah. Dickens has got some imagery there.
I will never let anyone tell me that historical authors were highbrow and proper and never wrote about anything that 20th century people would not discuss at the dinner table. I shan't do it. "I hadn't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker. "For upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "I don't mind going if lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. Some priorities there. "But I must be fed if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among you all. said the first speaker, for I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye. Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the man, and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street, its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. Brief tea break time.
Tea.
The fuel of Costube. All right. Let's see. He knew these men also. Perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance. He had made a point of always standing well in their esteem. In a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. How are you? Said one. How are you? Returned the other. Well, said the first. Old Scratch has got his own at last, eh? So I am told, returned the second. Cold, isn't it? Reasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose? No. Something else to think of. Good morning. Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost providence was the future. Nor could he think of anyone immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them. But nothing doubting that to whomever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement. He resolved to treasure up every word that he had heard, and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue that he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied, from the turn of the hand, and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. Unseen eyes, very importantly, capitalized. You have to know that they're mysterious and terribly important. They left it made him shudder and feel very cold, as capitalized unseen eyes I'm sure should. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offenses of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and with misery. Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed beetling shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty nails, keys, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in the mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frowsy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters, hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe. Here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it... You couldn't have met in a better place, said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. Come into the parlor. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how it squeaks! There ain't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones in here as mine. Ha ha! We're all suitable to our calling. We're well matched. Come into the parlor, come into the parlor. The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoking lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again.
I love the Rag and Bone Man. The Rag and Bone Man is such a weird character, but such a grim kind of reminder of the weird industries that popped up as a result of the Dickensian age and the weird industry.
Absolutely.
So like the Rag and Bone Man, for those who don't know, was collecting like literally just like scraps of anything. Like he'd collect like iron or cast-offs, and rags in particular is referred to in this context because paper was made from the recycled rags that were like tight woven into what then became paper. So like this guy is a supposedly sort of necessary part of the industry that has existed in the Dickensian era, but at the same time is still dodgy as heck because he's clearly taking things that have been like plundered from a dead man's house.
Yeah. It's an interesting bit of social commentary just to see it's like, well, this is such a necessary thing, and yet this is how people viewed it.
Yeah.
All right. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on the stool, crossing her elbows on her knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber? Said the woman. Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. That's true indeed, said the laundress. No man more so. Why then, don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. We should hope not. Very well, then, cried the woman. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. If you wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. It's the truest word that ever was spoke, said Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment on him. I wish it was a little heavier judgment, replied the woman, and it should have been, you may depend on it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Not like a couple pairs of boots, not a pair of boots, just a few boots. Okay?
Just scattered boots.
Scattered boots. You just scatter them. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains. Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took him down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, said the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything by reaching it out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Who else's, do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without them, I say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Bah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it north the Red Bear place. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call the wasting of it? Said old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons, marketing the corpse itself. Ha ha, laughed the same woman when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, took out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive to profit us when he was dead. Ha 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 ha. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. This case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. Such awful languages requires more teeth.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the fact that in the afterword that I was reading at the beginning and in Grant in my commentaries earlier, it's very much a function of this story that everybody knows what's going on except for Scrooge at this point. They're all just like, no, this isn't somebody, Scrooge. This is you. But Scrooge is just like refusing to believe it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very accurate of Scrooge as a character. He's completely oblivious to the impression he makes on other people.
Yeah, it's very true. Oh, goodness.
Even before the ghosts start following him around.
Good old ghosts.
All right. How is everyone doing in the chat?
Yes, we have about 17 to 19 people live in the chat right now. So there are people that have found us again. I have been trying to post. I was gonna say I've been trying to post links and Instagram stuff in my community tab because I was wrong. It is a new video. It's just that it seemed to be linking from the old one.
Okay. Well, let me go and fetch a new link in that case, and I will put it in my Instagram. But in the meantime, everybody say hello in the chat.
All right. If you go to my community tab, it'll be there. If you want to copy that to make it easier.
Sure.
And while we're checking on everybody in the chat, I will also say that because I wasn't able to get the ticker tape up for this particular segment, the fun facts that I have for this particular segment aren't visible. So I'll just mention that there aren't that many for this particular one because this one is pretty straightforward aside from the things we've already talked about, like the rag and bone and etc. But with the businessmen referring to Old Scratch, like they're saying what has happened to Old Scratch or Old Scratch has got his own. Old Scratch was an old-timey term for the devil. So they're referring to Scrooge as the devil himself. And these are like not nice businessmen, so you can imagine how disliked Scrooge was that the not nice like capitalists that are joined in Scrooge in being a fairly not good influence on the socioeconomic state of things also dislike him tremendously. And then later on there are some things about about the color of something hurting Mrs. Cratchit's eyes, it's because she's sewing black on black in very dark light. And then there is a passage that is referring to a child, which is a reference to the New Testament. So I'm just pulling up that passage in case anybody's curious. But in the meantime, that is where we're at. And I just wanted to appreciate everybody's...
See how many pages are left in this stave, and then folks can let us know whether they would rather have a digression to sing a song or read a Jewish fairy tale now, or whether they'd like to finish this chapter. Well, okay, we might not have much choice because the app I've been reading off on my tablet has decided to update. So technology has informed us that we're doing something else for a moment. Google Play Books, why are you like this? iOS, why are you like this? All right. So I'm going to take this opportunity to kvel about this book that I have just gotten. I think I'm holding up where it's going to be visible. It's called The Witches of Cxizent, and it's a collection of absolutely beautifully illustrated Jewish fairy tales made by the jeweler and educator Roots Metals. So I hadn't decided which one I was going to read, but we can see what's here. And I want to find something. Okay, they're all only a page or two, so we can do something familiar while we wait for yet more technological difficulties. Also, side note, I think this is the first time all day I have been warm enough in this room because I'm wearing pajama pants under a net petticoat under this heavy cotton skirt, and I'm like hiking it up so I don't absolutely melt. This room is normally freezing. Like, you all are used to me complaining about how cold this room is. All right, so while that does its thing, I am going to read us from this book the story of the Golem of Prague, which has beautiful illustrations. I hope you all can see them, and if you can't, you can get the book on Amazon, and I highly recommend it. It will be well worth it. All right. Once there was a Christian kingdom where Jews lived in terrible fear. For many years, the Christians dragged the Jews through the winding cobblestone streets of Prague and burned them at the stake. Then a merciful king rose to the throne, and he put an end to the slaughters. But the king's reign did not last very long. He was killed in battle, chopped in half at the torso with an axe. This is gruesome. This is okay.
I mean, very Dickensian.
Never let it be said that we do not shy away as a people from the more difficult side of life. We haven't exactly had much choice. See. His wicked son became king, and soon thereafter made a royal decree that all Jews must leave the city of Prague by nightfall or they shall be put to death. The Jews cried in desperation and turned to Rabbi Lew for wisdom. Rabbi Lew was well versed in the intricate matters of the Torah, so the Jews depended on him for answers. Mothers wailed with their children at their hips. Men paced the synagogue and argued with each other, desperate to discover a solution. Finally, the rabbi hushed the congregation with his fist in the air and said, "Oh dear," and it's that moment when the camera turns off.
This is also punishment for the fact that we had relatively few tech issues up until this point, I will say, so.
Yep, they're just going to happen all at once, and they're all going to happen with me.
Yep.
Is it back? Nope, I am still... Nope, okay, here we go.
We can see you.
Wonderful, we've got another 30 minutes. All right. All right, finally, the rabbi hushed the congregation with his fist in the air and said, "Do not worry, for I am sure of what to do." Rabbi Lew rushed down to the riverbank and fell on his knees. He constructed a little golem figurine out of wet clay and feverishly recited ancient Hebrew incantations. To add a final touch, Rabbi Lew added a piece of parchment with the secret name of God and brought the golem to life. As the statue took its very first breath, he grew double in size, and then triple, and so on and so forth until he was as tall as the highest church steeple. He will protect us, Rabbi Lew thought, and named the beast Yosele. Yosele kept watch over the Jewish quarter, and by nightfall, he terrorized the Christians that dared come near. Though the beast could neither talk nor think, the Jews breathed a giant sigh of relief and came to love Yosele, offering him food and drink. On and on this went for days until the Sabbath, when Rabbi Lew removed the parchment so Yeshua could rest, as the Torah commanded. Without the parchment, the golem shrunk to the size of a regular figurine, which Rabbi Lew stuffed into the attic of the synagogue. But one Sabbath, Rabbi Lou forgot to put the golem to rest. As the Jews swayed back and forth in prayer, the golem tore through the synagogue. He stepped on the heads of the congregation with the giant feet, squishing them flat to the ground. Horrified, Rabbi Lou now chased after the golem, who had gone to wreak havoc on the Christians of Prague. Yosela was so large that he stepped on everything and it turned to dust. Men, women, children, Christian and Jewish alike, shouted and parted out of the way, just as Moshe Rabbeinu had split the Red Sea. Finally, as Rabbi Lo intervened, and after wrestling with the beast for several minutes, he yanked out the piece of punishment. Right before his eyes, the golem shrunk to stone. Rabbi Lo returned the figurine to the attic, where it still haunts the synagogue to this day. So there's your Jewish ghost story for you this season.
If anybody's interested in a visual representation of it, there have been a few movies made of it, the most noteworthy of which was the 1915 silent film. Not necessarily as, it wasn't made by Jewish people and likely drew on, generic European folklore that included the Jewish myth that may have been kind of a couple of degrees separated, but the large strokes of the plot are still there, and it is on the whole fairly sympathetic to depictions of Jewish people, which is rare for 1915. So on the whole, not the I would say on the whole not the worst of the kinds of adaptations that you could see.
Not the total garbage fire one might expect. And yes, Faye, I didn't necessarily pick this particular story because of its links to All Souls, but for anybody who's familiar with the All Souls trilogy or just with a little bit of Jewish history, Rabbi Lo was, as best we can tell, a real person, and he does feature in the second book of the All Souls trilogy. So there's some fun little connections for you.
Oh, excellent.
See if we can return to our regularly scheduled programming. Yes, we can. My tablet has finished whatever update it was doing, and its battery is now charged and everything. So, let us continue. Announced itself with awful language. All right. The room was very dark. Too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round in it. Obedience to a secret impulse. Anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil aside than to dismiss the spectre at his side. O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honored head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open and generous and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice? Hard-dealing, gripping cares. They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and that for memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. Spirit, he said, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Let us go. Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again, it seemed to look upon him. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person unto me, said Scrooge, quite agonized. Spirit, I beseech you. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight, where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried but in vain to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in their play. At length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was now a remarkable expression in it, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer. Is it good, she said, or bad, to help him? Bad, he answered. We are quite ruined? No, there is hope yet, Caroline. If he relents, there is, she said, amazed. Nothing is past hope, if such a miracle has happened. He is past relenting, said her husband. He is dead. She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. What the half-drunken woman who I told you of last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, he was dying then. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know, but before that time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be a bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline. Yes, softened as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber, Spirit, which we left just now, will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out, and the spirit crossed on the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. The color hurts my eyes, she said. The color? Oh, poor Tiny Tim! They're better now again, said Cratchit's wife. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home, for the world. It must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his book. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother. They were very quiet again. At last, she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed. And so have I, cried Peter, often. And so have I, exclaimed another. So had all. But he was very light to carry, she resumed, intent upon her work, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble, and there is your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. The 2 young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. Sunday? You went today, then, Robert, said his wife. Yes, my dear, returned Bob. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child, cried Bob. My little child. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have perhaps been further apart than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of having someone been in there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed that little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and went down again, quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, who he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired as to what happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you have ever heard, I told him, I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how he ever knew that, I don't know. Knew what, my dear? Why, that you were a good wife, replied Bob. Everybody knows that, said Peter. Very well observed, my boy, cried Bob. I hope they do. Heartily sorry, he said, for your good wife. If I can be of service in any way, he said, giving me his card, that's where I live. Pray come to me. Now, it wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way. This was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim, and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. You would be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit. And then, cried one of the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself. Get along with you, retorted Peter, grinning, in the way of teenage boys everywhere. It's just as likely as not, said Bob, one of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part for one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us? Never, father, cried they all. And I know, Bob, said Bob. Excuse me.
If you'll permit me, V, just at this moment, while we're still in sadness for Tiny Tim, I just wanted to make reference really quick to the passage that Peter's reading when the story begins. It is a reference to oh shoot, I seem to have frozen briefly. Oh wait, no, we're back. Okay.
You're still here.
Yep, I'm losing my mind. It's all good. Anyways, the passage that Peter is reading is possibly Mark 9:36 or Matthew 18:2. Those are both passages in which disciples of Jesus Christ in the New Testament are asking who are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven and who are the most likely to get into the kingdom of heaven. And Christ replies by calling a child forth to him and placing it before his disciples and taking the child to him and saying that whoever humbles himself as this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So it is, I don't know if it was traditionally read as a passage upon the dying of a child, but it seems like that is the implication that Charles Dickens is making, is that that Tiny Tim, for being a child and having died, which was not an uncommon occurrence in the lives of Victorian England, the implication being that it's supposed to kind of offer a level of comfort to to the people who are surviving the deceased child, that their child has entered the kingdom of heaven. And I tell you what, had to dig around for this little testament, for this New Testament. Did not know where it was. Had to dig pretty deeply, but I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about before I started talking about that. Because the New Testament is not my long suit. So glad that I was able to extract that from my books to clarify that for people who aren't familiar.
Well found.
Oh, goodness.
All right, I shall pour myself another cup of tea.
Excellent. I shall do the same.
All right, and I think we shall continue. Let's see. And I know, said Bob, I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves, and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it. No, never, father, they all cried again. I am very happy, said little Bob. I am very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, his daughters kissed him, the two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed no order in these latter visions, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay anything, but went straight on, as to the end just now desired, until besought to Scrooge to tarry a moment. This court, said Scrooge, through which we hurry now, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come. The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere. The house is yonder, Scrooge exclaimed. Why do you point away? He still doesn't get it.
I feel like it's a bit willful at this point.
The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until he reached an iron gate. He paused to look round before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and reeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite, a worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one, capitalized, very important. He advanced toward it trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw a new meaning in its solemn shape. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, said Scrooge, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only? Still, the ghost pointed downward, to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead, said Scrooge. But if the courses be departing from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. And there's an illustration. I'm not sure you guys can see it, but
it's one of the ones I think if your edition is the same as mine, I
think it's the same one.
Yeah, it's John Leach. So it's one of the ones where Scrooge is sort of prostrate on the ground, holding his head in his hands. It's one of the ones that's circulating on the slideshow. Mm-hmm. So y'all have seen it pass by over the course of this stream, and hopefully will again by the end of by the end. So.
Yep. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? He cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. No, spirit! Oh, no! The finger was still there. Spirit, he cried, tight clutching at its robe. Hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been for this but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope? For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. Good spirit, he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it. Your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. The kind hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone. In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty, and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down to a bedpost.
Ooh.
Thus endeth Stave 4.
Oh, my favorite part of the Muppet Christmas Carol is the fact that they're too scared. Like the narrator's too scared to like actually watch that part of the movie. I always thought that was particularly charming.
I need to watch that film again. We had a running joke within Dickens Fair that our aesthetic, like the sort of standard of costuming that we tried to hold to was like, yes, reasonably historically accurate, but it was basically Muppets Christmas Carol. Like, yes, the Muppets Christmas Carol did a good job, but they also did a good job like setting the same sort of tone that we were aiming at for Dickens Fair.
Yeah.
And so we definitely ended up with a lot of the color combinations and the trim and things that they used, and it was just so true.
I love it. That's magnificent.
Yeah. It was great. All right. How is everybody doing in the chat? I see we've still got some folks around. I figure it's probably either getting towards dinner time or getting towards evening time or getting towards sleep time for the EU folks.
Yeah, I think there's
it's not well past sleep time already.
Yeah, so I think that yeah, we're dwindling down, but there is one more stave, and so
Yes.
we'll check in with folks, see how everyone's doing, take a brief break.
Yes.
But is there anything else that you wanted to add, V, before we move
see.
on?
If nothing else, so I might as well say it. I shall be putting out a video tomorrow if anybody saw on my Instagram the sort of like mysterious post of a bodice of the dress in rather poor lighting that everybody loved anyways. That video will be coming out tomorrow morning. I'm told that videos generally don't perform super well if they're released on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, but unfortunately the timing sort of worked out so that it had to be tomorrow. So if y'all could share that one around, I promise it's a good one. It contains a Dickens cast party to celebrate the fact that despite the strike, we still love each other and we still love being silly together. Mm-hmm. It involves that dress and it involves caroling. So you will get to hear singing with harmony and everything. And if we get a decent number of views on it in the first several days, I have a great deal of bonus caroling footage from the party that I could potentially be convinced to put up on Instagram. So again, share this video around, get it out into the world, and you might get bonus singing.
You guys have your mission. You heard it here first.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
I love it. All right. So with that, if everything's good to go, we will move into another break time. A little bit more of our Alistair Sim Christmas Carol, which has been a delightful distraction for break time. And then we'll have Sarah, who is Pins Abigail on Instagram, reading a pre-recorded section of Stave 5 because, bless her heart, was taken away by family requirements, which are much more important than this silly little video. So I'm very glad that she opted for that instead, and she wishes she was with us. But in the meantime, we have her lovely voice and her lovely face singing Christmas carols, reading a Christmas carol. So with that, we'll wave bye for the time being, and we'll be back in a moment. Bye.
Fare you well and happy Christmas.
So we'll transition.
I should have sat somewhere else. My shoulder's killing me.
That's okay. I'm gonna pause.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this edition of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol that I've been reading from. It is illustrated by a man named Roberto Innocenti, which you may have guessed.
I'm going to mute you just
He's
briefly.
Italian. And I couldn't help it. I wanted to learn a little bit more about him. And turns out he has illustrated a bunch of other sort of classic stories. it's probably a little hard to see the artwork with the fire going, so I'll share a couple of pictures with Liz so that you can all see them. He has a very painterly style. He's self-taught as an illustrator, but his images are really detailed and very, some of them are kind of monochrome, but others are really colorful. He has just a really beautiful way of fitting a lot into each illustration. So I learned that he illustrated an edition of Pinocchio, which is also written by an Italian, Carlo Collodi, who is also from Florence, which is where Roberto Innocenti is from. And he's also done pictures for The Nutcracker. He's done pictures for Cinderella, which he set in the flapper era because he didn't want to be influenced by anybody else's illustrations for the story. And he also has written and illustrated books about the Holocaust. It's really interesting because he was born at the very end of World War II in Italy, which, you know, has a deep history of fascist thinking. And he really wanted to depict a child's experience of the Holocaust and give a very unvarnished account, not pulling any punches, really. And I just found that really interesting that he took, you know, those experiences from the child's perspective and really gave them a sense of the you know, the darkness and the you know, evil that was happening around them, but also managed to infuse those stories with just, you know, the glimmer of hope. I just thought that his, you know, his overall body of work, a really, really interesting mix. And he's been awarded, he's been, you know, had his books be given starred reviews and all of that. So anyway, the story, you know, Charles Dickens's story is very familiar, but I thought maybe not everyone would know about this particular illustrator. So the children's librarian in me, it just can't help but come out. Anyway, thank you so much for joining this live stream, and I hope that you're able to donate to the GoFundMe on behalf of the Global Hunger Project, and if not, please share, and enjoy your Christmas and have a wonderful holiday. And if you're not celebrating Christmas, have a wonderful solstice, have a wonderful break, and I'll see you on the flip side. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Stave 5. The End of It. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own, the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. They are not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath, and making a perfect Laocoon of himself with his stockings. I am as light as a feather, I am as happy as an angel, I am as merry as a schoolboy, I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody, a Happy New Year to all the world. Hello here, whoop, hello! He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there perfectly winded. "There's the saucepan that the gruel was in," cried Scrooge, starting off again and going round the fireplace. "There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas Present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right, it's all true, it all happened. Ha ha ha!" Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop, hello there." He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell, bell, dong, ding, hammer, clang, clash. Oh, glorious, glorious. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold. Cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet, fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about him. "Eh?" returned the boy, with all his might of wonder. "What's today, my fine fellow?" said Scrooge. "Today?" replied the boy. "Why, Christmas Day." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow." "Hello," returned the boy. "Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner?" Scrooge inquired. "I should hope I did," replied the lad. "An intelligent boy," said Scrooge. "A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one." "What, the one as big as me?" returned the boy. "What a delightful boy," said Scrooge. "It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck." "It's hanging there now," replied the boy. "Is it?" said Scrooge. "Go and buy it." "Walker!" exclaimed the boy. "No, no," said Scrooge. "I am in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown." The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have got a shot off half so fast. "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. "He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's Wilby." The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. "I shall love it as long as I live," cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. "I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, whoop, how are you? Merry Christmas." It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped him short off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. "Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town," said Scrooge. "You must have a cab." The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you are at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster about it, and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas Present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delightful smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir, Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe?" It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sirs," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, "how d'ye do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." "Mr. Scrooge?" "Yes," said Scrooge, "that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness—" Here Scrooge whispered in his ear. "Lord bless me!" cried the gentleman, as if his breath were gone. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" "If you please," said Scrooge, "not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?" "My dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, "I don't know what to say to such "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?" "I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. "Thank you," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you." He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very. "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" said Scrooge. "He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." "Thank ye, he knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. "I'll go in here, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points and like to see that everything is right. "Fred," said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started! Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with the footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in! It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1/4 past. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge, in his accustomed voice as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please." It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob, appearing from the tank. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. "I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "and therefore I am about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as those would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins and have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us, and so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. The end.
fantastic. We're back. And we're back for our final goodbye. Thank you so much to Sarah for that, including a lovely examination of another one of the illustrators. I've been demonstrating the illustrations by Arthur Rackham and John Leach in the slideshow that's been going on throughout the entire live stream, and I'm so glad that Sarah also had a copy that had unique illustrations. It is one of the more delightful things about this series is that Dickens did seem to have a pretty strong idea that the illustrations should be a big part of it, and had collaborated with John Leach from the beginning, and I really appreciate that as an extra facet that Sarah was able to bring. So thank you so much for that, and thank you very much for reading. Thank you everyone for reading. This was a magnificent experience. I'm so happy that we were able to do it, that we were able to get through everything, tech issues notwithstanding, and thank you very much for everybody's patience in having to skip over to a new live stream. That was also very nice of all of you. At this moment in the world and in life, we have raised over $400 for the Global Hunger Project, which I'm so proud of. Thank you so much everyone for donating. As I said at the beginning of the live stream, the donations are going to be open until the end of day on December 26th. If you can donate, I'd appreciate it. This is such a worthy cause and such an excellent thing to be doing at this time of year, and as Dickens rightly points out, it is most important at this time of year to help the poor and destitute with some food and drink and means of warmth. So with all of that said, thank you again for watching, for listening. Thank you to all my readers, all of my viewers, and everyone who watches this after the fact. I'm very grateful. Have a wonderful holiday season. Whether you celebrate any holidays or not, I hope that it is safe and warm for you all the same, or if you're in Australia, maybe cooler. The Southern Hemisphere does have a little bit of a hot streak going on right now. Thank you, Grant, for getting into a 3-piece suit and glistening for us. It was very much appreciated. Have a really wonderful holiday, everybody, and a really, really great rest of your day or night, as the case may be. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I will be back in the new year, probably the second week of January, with a new video, and in the meantime,